Gusts. A few days later, Peter Sam was alone in the shed. He awoke to the sound of an unfamiliar whistle. He opened his eyes to see the thin controller driving an engine towards him. "I would like you to meet Duncan," he said. "He'll be starting work in the morning. Please make him feel welcome." With that, the thin controller jumped down from Duncan's cab and strode away. "We're very glad to have you here," smiled Peter Sam. "We needed a spare engine for a while, what with all the trouble we've had lately." Duncan sniffed and sized up the shed. "Well, a bit small," he said plainly, "but it'll do." Peter Sam was taken aback. "At least I'm not cooped up in that dirty old factory anymore," Duncan continued. "Not that you know anything about that." Peter Sam gulped. His eagerness to befriend Duncan dissipated quickly. Peter Sam wasn't the only one having trouble conversing with Duncan. A few days later, Rusty and Sir Handel were back in the shed, and the three of them chatted whilst Duncan was working. "He won't even look at me," said an offended Rusty. "Ha! You're thinking about it too much," Sir Handel stated. "He just puts work ahead of pointless chatter." Peter Sam chuckled. "You only like him because he grumbles about the coaches more than you." Sir Handel grew red in the face and huffed. "Well," Rusty continued, "he does seem to work hard, but he's always in a hurry. He races about recklessly. That will catch up to him soon." The other engines agreed, but said no more. Over the next couple of days, the weather changed drastically. Dark clouds loomed in the sky, refusing to let the sun peek out. Rain came in spurts, and winds began to blow, sometimes gently, and other times as a fierce gale. Duncan worked even faster in attempts to get back to the shed. "I'd rather be in that rotten factory on days like this," he sulked to himself. Mr. Murphy is a guard who has worked on the Skarloey Railway for many years. The crews looked up to him, as his railway expertise often got them out of tight situations. He had picked up many rituals and routines over the years, and they often helped make operations run smoothly. Mr. Murphy didn't trust the lightweight, narrow-gauge rolling stock on days where high winds blew. To rectify this, he placed sandbags inside the van. This ensured the van would stay upright instead of being bobbed about by the wind. One afternoon, Mr. Murphy was due to be the guard for Duncan's goods train. The skies were grey, and the wind seemed to be whispering warnings to him. "Well, I'll take that old Mother Nature is telling me to be careful today," Mr. Murphy chuckled as he loaded his van with sandbags. When he finished, he strode to the station building to have a tea. Duncan soon arrived to assemble the train, but he and his crew weren't aware of Mr. Murphy's rituals. He quickly shunted his trucks, but collected a different brake thing. As soon as they were ready, Duncan whistled impatiently. "Where's that guard?" he grumbled. "I want to get out of this weather as quickly as possible. Hurry up!" He continued to whistle as Mr. Murphy came running out, cross at being hurried. He blew his whistle and jumped into the van. He didn't notice the lack of sandbags until after Duncan was out of the yard. "Well, no sense trying to stop this one. He's raring to get work done. Well, maybe I'll be all right, just this once." With that, he sat down to solve a crossword puzzle and finish his tea. Duncan snorted down the line, his trucks rattling behind him. He came to the part of the line sheltered by the forest. The trees kept the winds at bay, leaving the train undisturbed. "No rain yet," mumbled Duncan. "Let's hope it stays that way." He picked up speed and raced out of the forest. But Duncan was heading for trouble. The full force of the wind hit him when he left the protection of the trees. His trucks rocked back and forth, and his driver and fireman clung to his handles for dear life. Duncan wanted to be back in his shed more than ever. Suddenly, a fierce gust buffeted the train. A mighty crunching sound came from behind Duncan, and his train became harder to pull. His driver looked back, then screwed the brakes on at once. The gale had tipped the brake van, causing it to fall on its side. The trucks remained upright, but the last truck was derailed. The crew fought their way through the winds to the back of the train. They found Mr. Murphy lying against the wall of the van, clutching his right arm and wincing in pain. The driver helped him to the cab, and the fireman ran to a nearby cottage to phone for an ambulance. Duncan now felt very guilty. He felt even worse when he found the thin controller waiting for him at the sheds. "Mr. Murphy is a very esteemed member of this railway," he began angrily. "His injury was caused by the impatience and recklessness of you and your crew. You need to learn respect and patience. I've seen the way you bounce about the yard, and I will not tolerate it. I'll find a way to sort your behavior out, or you won't be calling my railway home much longer." The thin controller turned sharply on his heel and strode away at a brisk pace. The other engines said nothing to him that night in the shed. They were fond of Mr. Murphy and were cross with what had happened. Duncan stared at his buffers, but could feel the cold stares of the other engines through the darkness. The little engine had never felt so alone before. He closed his eyes and drifted off into a troubled sleep.